Welcome back, you filthy exiles. Now, if you're like me, you've been working for the last few days and you haven't realized that an awesome article came out on the in PC Gamer about 3 days ago, and maybe you couldn't get your hands on it to read it, and I was in the same situation up until today. So I thought I'd run through some of the awesome updates from the article here, and also there's been some other updates that potentially could allude to some things on the X account for Path of Exile 2. So yeah, anyway, this is the take from a veteran of 11 years of the game, and I will say I am super excited for Path of Exile 2 at this stage, and we're so close. I think we're like 28 days away. So let's get into the video. Okay, so one of the first topics they range around is difficulty. Now, going back to some of the previous controversies that existed around the Path of Exile 2 release, was around it being a Souls-like game. And the article makes note that the difficulty curve has been smoothed out, making the game more approachable for new players of the genre. I'm just going to coin this as Exiles-like moving forwards, which is more or less what I predicted back then, and I think a previous video and a lot of other content creators predicted as well, which was, you know, they weren't going to make a Souls-like game out of Path of Exile. And so from the looks, the article alludes to this now being a much more approachable outcome and much easier, and we'll talk about that further in the video as we go down some of the comments that I read in the article as well. So another really cool point in the article that it points out is that all classes feel distinctly unique moving forwards, in that they don't feel like a base template like how they felt in Path of Exile 1. And I actually agree with that comment. In Path of Exile 1, they do feel really boilerplate early on. And what the article teases out is from the onset, every class that you play feels totally different mechanically. And I think that's a really cool concept. So it basically means you're going to get a different experience for every single class that you play. And there's 12 classes for us to master. I believe this is awesome because if you're a player that likes nimbleness, then you're going to like speed-based characters like the monk or the huntress. And if you're like me and you're getting old and your hands don't work the same way as they used to, then you're going to like a more laid back, less hitty approach and more single face tank sort of, you know, go and get smacked in the face and hit them with a big hammer approach and have a huge shield approach. And I sort of like that because there's a whole heap of archetypes that I can see, including like the Templar that hasn't yet been revealed, that would be more like slower pace but bigger hits versus clicking a lot of buttons, which would be other classes. And that's great for other players, but for me, and the guides that I'm planning on putting out, we're going to be focusing on tanks, so that's really good to see in the article as well, that that's confirming that position. Now, another really big topic of conversation, I've seen this on hundreds of comments in all different videos, is around the clear speed and game pacing. So, another really interesting point that was raised in the article, and I'll paraphrase, Falling Thunder is capable of clearing entire screens in one hit or taking a boss's health bar down by 10 to 20% in one hit. This is indicating that the pace of your build will likely be linked to various skill combinations you utilize and how you set up bigger attacks with those skill combinations. I believe also this means that you could play 3 sort of build archetype variants or variants within the same build class or ascendancy, and that'd be basically focusing on low DPS but high speed, which would be like clear speed builds. You'd have like your middle of the lane builds, which are like all-rounders that can do a reasonable amount of damage and to bosses and a reasonable amount of clear speed. And they're not going to be as fast, but they're also not going to be super slow. And then I reckon you're going to have your low clear but super high DPS builds or bossing builds. Now, this isn't a dissimilar concept to PoE 1, but I think the approach is going to be very different in the way that we configure builds and set up skill chaining and things like that to achieve these outcomes. And I sort of like that because it means that not only can you make 12 different builds times by 3 ascendancies, but then you could potentially multiply that by 3 different approaches to any one particular build, multiplied by the number of skills that you play, which is an insane number of different variants of builds when you really look at it, and then combine that with 9 skill gems as well. I just don't even know yet how we're going to approach builds in this game. But basically everything that we're seeing here means this is just going to be an unparalleled level of adventure and journey in figuring out what to play and or finding your optimum playstyle, or just playstyles that are really fun and that you enjoy. So basically, another point from the article is that it draws conclusions that the Mercenary gives a totally different feel to Path of Exile 2, and that is that it starts to take the form of a shooter, for the better part of the word, and this is sort of backed up by references over multiple interviews from Jonathan around this being essentially the gun class and playing like a shooter and with WASD, and these were comments that were, you know, as recent as the last few interviews he did in the Tokyo Game Show and whatnot as well. Interestingly, the article also makes a comment that the devs themselves believe the Mercenary class is the easiest class to learn out of the lineup of classes for newer players, which sort of indicates that in the past, like, bow classes have been tedious and whatnot. I feel like the Merc's going to be a little tankier, but do a good amount of damage, and it's probably going to be really easy with WASD and big explosions and stuff like that. So I'm actually keen to play that class, but I'm still dedicated to the warrior at this stage. Okay, so the next point that was raised was around the axe and the campaign, and there's a lot to pull apart here too. So in the article, they made comments that each act would be about 9 to 10 hours apiece, and that's 6x6 acts for newer players. And we need to emphasize the for newer players part, because they also made a comment that one of the devs could clear the first 3 acts in under 5 hours. That's probably going to be the case for most of us, if not faster, but, you know, we'll see how that plays out. However, I don't know about in total it being a 60-hour campaign, whether you're new or not new, and really how's this going to work if your build doesn't work out, or if you want to start a secondary toon or a new character or something like that. But it also sort of indicates that skills may be more balanced in Path of Exile 2 than in Path of Exile 1, which means gone are the days of when you find out that your build doesn't work only when you get to the very end game and start mapping. And potentially there is a lot more balance where skills that previously in Path of Exile 1 really didn't scale well, maybe every skill equally scales a hell of a lot better. And if that's the case, I'm all for that, and I'm okay with the campaign length, as long as you get a guaranteed outcome that your build's going to not be horrible when you get to mapping. Otherwise, you know, respeccing is going to be a pain. But that being said, respeccing in Path of Exile 2 is gold cost. So essentially, it's going to be a lot more approachable than previously, and we don't know anything about ascendancies or anything like that yet, so we don't know how that's going to be done, but I would assume that would also be gold cost as well, similar to how it's done with, you know, every other sort of skill gem, because I don't think regret orbs are in Path of Exile 2 as they were in Path of Exile 1. Now, the article also mentions that the Act 3 final battle, which is going to be what we get in the early access in 28 days, will be absolutely epic, despite we won't get a full game straight away at early access. I think this comment is on the money. What we see from Acts 4 to 6 should be off the chain totally, if this is the comment just from the Act 3 boss. I also note that there was still no information about Act 6 provided, and they made that comment in the article. And essentially what they did get told was that this last act would be half of the length of all the previous acts. But I would say that of this, we can probably expect a good spanking from GGG, and they'll throw a lot harder content at us for when the final game comes out, because it's going to have to get us ready for mapping, which who knows how hard that's going to be. I remember Path of Exile 1 mapping, and it was almost impossible when you first got into it. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the end game looks like. I think we're going to have a totally different experience. And for those of us like me who played Path of Exile in the original beta, and then when mapping first became available, in fact, I still have original maps somewhere in my stash tabs from the very first maps that ever got released. It was a really hard game. I think there was a Gamescom or something like that Chris Wilson did an interview for, and he basically said maps were almost impossible, and they definitely were a different beast back in the day before all the power creep. So that's probably what we're looking at with Path of Exile 2 as well. On the loot front, it seems to be getting compressed and refined in Path of Exile 2 according to the comments in the article, and they basically made the comment loosely that there's fewer vendor trash items being dropped and more meaningful and impactful items being dropped, which is sort of in line with the changes that we saw in the Settlers of Kalgur League, which is being translated into Path of Exile 2, with better vendor gear being made available to easily progress through the game as well. and the ability to gamble with gold, which we already know was in Path of Exile 1. So that's also being added into Path of Exile 2 as well. And I did try that when I tried it at ExileCon as well last year. So yeah, loot's going to hopefully be a lot better. But who knows how that's going to be impacted upon in relation to like, you know, your T0 and 1 drops and stuff like that. Only time will tell. And yeah, but that's good. So less vendor trash on the screen is a good improvement. Another comment made in the article too was that GGG has made it very clear that they want the community to make weird and wacky and insane combo builds, and notes that while Zoom builds don't look like they're as fast on paper, they're still going to be pretty spectacular on screen to watch, and speedrunning is probably also going to be a thing in Path of Exile 2. This feeds back into the previous comment I made about the dev being able to clear the first 3 acts in 5 hours. So yeah, it's builds are what I'm all about, so I'm all keen for this. Switching skills between different archetypes and going outside of the confined recommendations is definitely going to be something that I'm super keen to look at. But anyway, only time will tell how we approach builds, because it's just going to be a totally new experience. Alright, so the biggest change that we got was around FLASKS. So they also mentioned in the article that maybe the biggest thing is that the flasking system will be getting totally reworked. This is that we will only have one life and 1 mana flask moving forwards by default, and you'll be getting utility trinket slots added to the game. This will likely be really good for console players because they only have to hit 2 buttons moving forwards. They also made a comment that the utility trinkets that will be added to the game will also be able to be automated as well, so you won't have to actually hit them. Again, a really good move for console players and for players who don't like playing, you know, piano keys on your keyboard. The only thing about this is I hope, and I saw this in some of the Reddit comments too, I hope that the game doesn't go the direction of over-catering for consoles, and that's nothing against console players. It just sort of, I hope it doesn't go away from being PC as the primary focus and then trying to make it an all-inclusive console game, and then, you know, PC players get left on the back step. I don't believe that will happen. But I also hope that that isn't the start of decisions that will allude to that. That being said, we just got to trust the process. I'm sure things are going to be fine. But this is an interesting change. I don't know how to think about it just yet, or what to think about it just yet, but we'll see how it feels when the early access comes out as to whether or not it's good or bad, and it could always change again, who knows. Another thing that also that was also revealed was the art for the witch. And at this stage, there's a lot of speculations going around that this is the Warlock Ascendancy that might be getting added to the game. This would be very similar to Last Epoch, and it would make sense that the Witch would have a Warlock Ascendancy, because honestly, the Sorceress is now the new Elemental class, so we'd expect the Elementalist to be on the Sorceress. So that means that frees up a Ascendancy for the Witch, and this would be like Fire skills and maybe Chaos skills and like Raging Spirits and stuff like that. Maybe even Spectres could be part of this as well. But this could be really cool if that's the case, and the art looks absolutely insane. So let's hope that we're getting a Warlock in Path of Exile 2. Okay, so the last bit of news is something that got posted on the X the other day, and this was around monster types in the game. Now, I don't know if this alludes to like monsters, just like, oh, here's the monster information. But for Path of Exile 2, that usually indicates that Bestiary is around the corner and Einat could be returning to the game. Now, if that is the case, that's really cool. There's definitely a lot of monsters in the game, and they allude to like over 100 bosses and then like hundreds of monsters being added into the game as well. It would absolutely make sense that beastcrafting and bestiary would be added to the game. And since Einar is the brother of Nico, and Nico is attached to Delve, it could be indicating that Delve could be coming into the game too. I'm really clutching at straws for that one, but you know, it could be on the money. But anyway, I'll put some pictures up on the screen if I haven't already done that. And they look really cool. Like the monster design in Path of Exile 2 is spectacular, and it's just going to be something else and special, and I'm super excited and totally there for it. Okay, so there's a huge amount of information in that article. There was a posting that was put up, and I'll put a link to it in the description below if you want to read through it yourself. And yeah, anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to like and sub to the channel, and don't forget to follow the X and the Twitch as well. I'll be back on stream tomorrow night. And yeah, I will see you guys hopefully with the next update that comes out for Path of Exile 2, and hopefully we get an announcement for the early access like entry keys this week, because I am gunning to spend $1,000 on Path of Exile. I am just keen to give them my money at this stage. But anyway, I'll see you guys later, and have a good one.